Chapter 3. Punishment. They were taken back to the same office. Their things were still there. Greg went over to them, but Ted said, "I think it best that we don't touch them." They sat down and waited. They wanted to talk, but were afraid to say a word. After a few minutes, Commander Brown came in. They stood up, but Commander Brown told them to be seated. He sat there looking at them and said, "Relax. It's not going to be that bad." He took a deep breath and continued, "I was just wondering how you were going to take this. You've been set up. We have played a cruel trick on you two." He stopped to let it set in. They didn't say a word, just sat there waiting, perhaps for the next shoe to fall. He asked, "Did you hear what I said, Ted? Greg?" Ted says, "I heard you, but it's not making sense." "What do you mean set up? A trick?" Greg says, "I heard you. You want to prepare us for prison time." Commander Brown says, "I guess I need to explain a little more. You are not going to prison. You just passed another space program test." Ted was getting angry and said, "Excuse me if I don't appreciate your little joke. How did we pass a test we haven't taken? Are you always this cruel?" Greg grabbed him and said, "Ted, calm down." Commander Brown says, "That's okay, Greg. I was expecting worse from Ted. Both of you sit down and I'll tell you everything." They sat down and a guard brought them a large vanilla milkshake. They sat there a minute and started to slowly drink. Commander Brown took a deep breath and said, "When we realized how young you would be, and all the tests and programs you had completed with outstanding perfection, we never thought you would be ready for the first flight. When we realized, we couldn't just say you couldn't take it. So we came up with a plan to make sure you were quick enough on your feet and daring enough to try anything necessary. So we decided to find out just how much you wanted it and what you would do to get it. We made up the 'you have to be 25 rule. It did just what we hoped it would. It made you angry. Then you came up with your plan. I have to say, I told them it would work. It did." He paused and waited, but they didn't say a word. He asked, "Would you like me to continue?" Still, they didn't say anything, so he went on. "Yesterday's countdown wasn't real, just to get you moving with your plan." Still, they didn't say anything. He continued, "Well, to finish, the countdown starts Wednesday at 10 a.m., and the two of you will be on it if you still want it. I will leave you now to discuss or cuss me, scream or yell. I'll be back in an hour to get your answer." He got up and left. Ted was angry. He threw his empty milkshake container into the trash with such force the wastebasket slid nearly across the room. Greg says, "Ted, did you hear him say we were going on the space trip Wednesday?" "I heard. You can go, but I'll not be pushed around that way." "Who does that to people who have worked so hard? I don't understand it." Greg says, "Ted, stop and think. You are usually the one to calm me. They weren't trying to hurt us, but just to make sure we were ready. I have to say, it makes sense to me." He looked at Greg like he didn't know who he was. And then he started laughing and asked, "Did you hear what he said? We will be on that flight Wednesday. Don't wake me. I know we are still in the white cells." Greg says, "You're not dreaming. I heard it too." Ted says, "We need to get out and tell our families." He went to the door, but it was locked. He said, "I should have known. We have to play by their rules." Commander Brown came in and said, "Sit down. We have a few things to talk about first." They all sat down and he continued. I understand you've decided to take the flight. That's great, as we need a couple like you on this flight. Ted asks, how soon can we go tell our parents? They must be really upset thinking we're going to prison. Commander Brown says, guess you haven't realized that your parents are in on this. We couldn't have pulled it off without their cooperation. Ted had again jumped to yell, but Greg pulled him back down. Greg asked, how long have they been in on this? 2 days before we told you that you had to be 25. At this, Ted slumped in his chair and looked like he was going to cry. But he said, I thought my dad and I were so close. How could he have kept this from me? Commander Brown says, look, he knew how much you wanted to be on that flight and was willing to make sure you got your chance, no matter the cost. Greg says, I can't imagine how much they hurt keeping this from us. The sacrifices they made. Ted, it was all for us. Ted says, you're right. I need to go thank them. Commander Brown says, I'm afraid that's not possible. I have papers for you to sign and a couple more things you need to know before you go get ready for the flight. There are a few more physicals you'll need to take. There's just a lot you need to do before tomorrow. Your families will be here in the morning. Ted says, I need to talk to them. I can't just go off like this. Commander Brown handed them some papers to sign. After they had signed them, he said, oh, I should have told you about the space trip before you signed. Let me tell you your destination. If you don't want to go, you can tear these forms up. Okay? They both said that it was okay with them. He said, your mission is to go to that black hole out there and to enter it and find out what's on the other side. Greg says, do we know we can get back out? That is what you'll be answering. That hole has been studied by scientists for over 2 years. There are things that come out, so there must be a way. You and the crew will have all the studies they have made and all they have observed. We don't have time for you to study them before you go. They say there is a sign it is getting smaller. So if we are going to get the answers, this may be our last chance. But what if we can't get back? That's why the two of you are going. You think in ways the others don't. And if anyone can figure this out, you two can. Now, do I tear up these papers or not? Ted says, hold on a minute. He took Greg to the back of the room. They didn't say a word, just looked deep into each other's eyes. Then they came back and Ted said, Sir, we accept this mission. We have decided to forgive everyone for their part in this. But I have one question. Did, I will call him JJ, have any part in this? Commander Brown asks, who are you referring to? You know, the guard I helped out years ago. Yes, he did. That's great. And then you can pay him what I owe him. I think that's only fair, don't you? You're right. And I'll see that he gets what's coming to him. He left and said to the guard at the door, take them to the exam room. They spent the rest of the day being checked and having blood drawn. Then they had to get proper uniforms. They had to be fitted or altered to fit just right and the right emblem sewn on them. Finally, Greg said, I'm so hungry, I feel faint. Ted says, me too. He motioned to the guard and said, when do we eat? That milkshake was a little thin. The guard looked at his watch and said, yes, you need to get ready for dinner. Follow me. He took them to a small room with nicely made-up beds, with a uniform laid out on each bed. He said, get cleaned up and put these on. I'll be back in about 30 minutes to help you and then take you to dinner. Greg asked, wasn't that your friend? Yes, but he motioned me to silence. What's going on? The commander knows about him, so why the secrecy? I don't know. Just part of the program to make sure no one says something that could reveal some top secret, says Ted. Who could we tell? I don't think it is for now, just in the future. I'm getting a quick shower, then you can get one. We must hurry if we're going to be ready when he comes back. They were both showered and dressed when the guard came back, but there were parts of the uniforms they were having trouble with. The guard helped them. Greg asked, why all these invisible buttons and plastic or nylon zippers? He answered, certain materials and metals play havoc with the sensitive things on the spaceship. He looked at his watch and said, very good. A little early, but it'll give you time to meet the rest of the crew. Just a couple of words before we go. Congratulations on achieving your dreams. Ted says, thank you for your help. The guard gave a little salute, indicating he understood what Ted meant. They were taken to a beautiful dining room. Just then, 4 men in similar uniforms and 1 guard were entering the room from the other doorway. Greg comments, looks like they aren't trusted either. The guards snickered and said, no, we're only here to show you the way and make sure you stay on schedule. One of the men stepped forward and said, I'm Captain James Allen. Please call me Jim. I know both of you. Your reputation reached me well before today. Next to me are Peter Farmer, George Main, and Albert Bird. The other 3 stepped forward, shaking hands with Peter, saying, call me Pete. Albert saying, call me Al. And George saying, you can call me by my name, George. Everyone laughed, which broke the stiffness in the room, and everyone was talking. They were told to be seated and dinner was served. There was fried chicken and pork chops. There was a variety of vegetables and a large tossed salad. There was also iced tea, milk, and coffee. Then they brought the chocolate cake, apple pie, and ice cream. Greg remarked, the chosen men were served their last meal. Everyone laughed lightly, thinking of the unknown ahead of them. When they were finished eating, Ted and Greg said goodnight to the rest of the crew. They were then taken to another room where their families were waiting. The only guard in the room was Ted's friend. He was allowed to join the festivities, but soon he said, we need to wrap this up. I need to take you to your room at 9. We have rooms set up for your families. They'll be there with the families of the rest of the crew to see you off at 7. A light breakfast will be set up for those who want to eat at 6. I should remind you, too, that if you eat too much, it might have a desire to return during takeoff. Everyone laughed and said goodnight.